My guest is Meg Whitman. She is the former CEO of Hewlett Packard, former president and CEO of eBay. Meg has held executive positions at Procter & Gamble, Hasbro, DreamWorks, and the Walt Disney Company. She ran for governor of California in 2010. She's now part of the FC Cincinnati ownership group of Major League Soccer. Meg, thanks for joining me on Sports Business Radio. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me this morning.
Let's start with the FC Cincinnati ownership group. I know you've got ties to Cincinnati. How did that all come about and why Major League Soccer?
Yeah. Well, let's start with why Major League Soccer. So if I back all the way up, we said, we think that we'd like to make an investment in professional sports. If you look at our family office, we had investments in lots of other things, but we didn't have a play in professional sports. And you look at, the appreciation and the success of professional sports over the last 30 years, and we think will happen in the next 20 or 30 years, we thought, okay, we want to be in this asset class. And then the question is, what sport? So we looked at all the different sports. And as an investor, I like to invest behind trends. It's what I learned early on in my career is if wind is at your back, it's way better than if wind is in your face. And so we looked at all the different sports, and it was clear to us that the growth story here was Major League Soccer. And, if you look at it, there's 60 million soccer fans in the U.S. The U.S. is the number one buyer of worldwide media rights. We're jointly hosting the World Cup with Mexico and one other country in 2028, Canada. And we're the number 3 sport by participation. And I think about that because think about all the kids coming up. What we know is whatever you played as a child, you want to watch as an adult. And so if you look at the growth of youth soccer in America, I thought that was also really good. And it's a global sport. MLS can reach 400 million consumers worldwide. So that was the right trends for us. Then the question is what team? Mm-hmm. And you're right, I do have a connection. I started my career at a business school at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. And I'm now still on the board, many years later, I'm on the board at Procter & Gamble. So I knew the city, but I was also very interested in the dynamics of these small markets. Interestingly, in soccer, the small markets do very well. So FC Cincinnati has the 3rd largest attendance in the league, which surprised me, for a small city like Cincinnati. An incredible, and passionate fan base, right? We're the 5th largest revenue soccer team in the United States. And I thought that, we sort of punched beyond ahead of our weight there. So let me turn off my phone, sorry. And so then I said, and then the quality of the ownership group, Carl Lindner and his family, our family, the Joseph family, the Farmer family, which owns Cintas. And so you've got actually 2 Fortune 50 CEOs in the ownership group. And I thought that, would help us along. So we were able to strike a deal with Carl and his family, and we basically really liked them and shared a lot of the same vision and values. And so that's why Cincinnati.
All makes sense. TQL Stadium, that is set to open to fans very soon. 26,000 seats. And it looks like, just a beautiful stadium, state of the art. When people come to TQL Stadium, what are some of the things that are going to stand out to them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're super excited about TQL because often local companies as sponsors of these naming rights is very, very powerful because they're in the community and they, know the local market. So we're thrilled by our relationship with TQL, which is an entrepreneurial story in and of itself. The company's only been around since 1998, and they're the 2nd largest freight brokerage firm in the country. So that's exciting. And then the stadium is the largest stadium. It has, I think what they'll see right away walking up to the East Plaza is what we call the fins, the LED lights that you may have seen the video, and we can certainly get you a video that would be fun to, put on the website or something. And anyway, the fins light. And so it looks like animation, but it's literally the lights changing on the fins. And so we can put FC Cincinnati on the fins. We can put TQL on the fins. We can put player names on the fins. We can do anything we want with those fins. So think about it as a dynamic canvas. The second thing that you'll see is the largest number of premium seats, a very large, fan base for the core of the what we call the Bailey, which are the standing fans at the end who are, almost often the most boisterous and fun part of going to a soccer game. Lovely suites, all modern technology, all touchless. So cashless and cashless payments is important because unlike the NFL where there's TV breaks, there's just breaks. There's just a couple of breaks in a soccer game. So you got to get your whole stadium in and out of that food service really fast. So it's all cashless. It's all touchless because of COVID. We were able to retrofit in the context of COVID. And then we'll launch with some very attractive apps, an app. So over time, the app will obviously have wayfinding and order from your seats and navigation and all kinds of things like that. So I think you'll feel like it's a pretty high-tech stadium.
You're as tech savvy as anyone out there. So it's interesting that you mentioned the cashless and the touchless. I've had a number of CEOs and pro sports owners on recently, and it seems like during the last year with the pandemic, everyone's trying to go cashless, touchless. You have self-cleaning stadiums.
Yep.
What are some other tech advancements that you've seen that you think are going to hit the sports world going forward in this new normal?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly, wayfinding, how do you get to your seat? Where's the bathroom with the least amount of traffic
Right.
during times, during a break? How do you order from your seat? Because I think that's going to be important as well. Now that's kind of table stakes in some ways. Obviously, very high bandwidth is important because you're going to have a crowd of people who are, and we have, state-of-the-art network with 5G because fans want to do replays. They want to do social media. They want to text with their friends. So that's table stakes too. I think most new stadiums have that, but it needs to be bulletproof. That network needs to be bulletproof. And so I think everyone is certainly, understanding that's something that's going to be very, very important.
Meg, I know Kroger is big in the Cincinnati area and they're partners with FC Cincinnati. And Power Up Premium Trail Mix is one of our partners. And I know they're a big partner of FC Cincinnati. How did that partnership all come about?
Yeah, well, Kroger's a local company, headquartered in Cincinnati. So there was a natural fit there. And so there's a great deal of interest, obviously, in consumer packaged goods. And one of the companies I know they're excited about is the Power Up Premium Trail Mix. And so they are a partner and, they've got a healthy brand. They've got a great brand positioning. We think it's a really good fit with FC Cincinnati. And they've got great brand ambassadors who are going to do activations in the studio. In the stadium.
Meg, what do we need to see, or what do we need to do to see more women owners in sports? Not only in Major League Soccer, but across the sports landscape. I've had Jeannie Buss on this show and, others, but we need more women owning sports teams. What needs to happen for that to take place?
Yeah. Well, I think professional sports has always been more male than female. That's starting to change. If you look at the fan base of male versus female fan bases, what isn't it the NFL now? I think almost 50-50 in terms of television viewing.
Yes.
And if you had told me that, when I was a little girl, I would have been amazed. So I think you're starting to see real, now female fan bases, which then, as those female fans grow up and are successful, then they think, well, gee, like when I grew up, I never thought I would own a professional sports team. It never occurred to me, right? I graduated from college in 1977. I never would have thought of that. But now it's a different world. The other thing that's interesting is all these women's teams are starting to get traction. The NWLS, SL, the Women's Soccer League.
Yes.
That's, starting to come on. So I think you'll start to see more women owners. And then, but by the way, the Cincinnati group is all women for MLS. Dee Haslam is a woman owner in Columbus. I'm a woman owner in Cincinnati. So, there's more than there have been in the past. So when you go to the governor's meeting, there's more women than there probably would have been 30 years ago or even 10 years ago.
That's good to hear, but I'm sure more progress to be made still.
More progress to be made always. But
you talked a little bit about Cincinnati as a sports market, the Bengals and you've got Xavier University there. You've got the Reds, obviously. For people listening to this who've never been to Cincinnati, never been to a sports event in Cincinnati, what kind of a fan base is Cincinnati?
Yeah. Well, as you might remember, the Big Red Machine was all the rage,
Right.
a number of years ago, and the Bengals have been there forever. And they're big into college sports. Just up the road, in Dayton and Columbus, football is a huge thing. So it's a sports state, frankly. And Cincinnati has an avid fan base. And what was interesting to us about Cincinnati is, remember, FC Cincinnati was a USL team before we moved up to the MLS. And we had, I'll give you the statistics because I wrote it down. It was quite remarkable. We had 6,000 season tickets in 2016, 18,000 in 2018, and 20,000 for 2019. These are season tickets. And that was the first year in MLS. So I think this is a soccer excited town. And I think it's partly because of the values that we put out there. You know, we want to be a winning team. We have not yet been a winning team in MLS. We had to go so fast from USL to MSL. So we're to MLS. So we're excited about a couple of the new players that we've, found this year to join the team. But we want to be a winning team. We want to be a family-friendly team, and we want to give back to the community. So we have embedded ourselves in the community. We've got lots of youth sports, youth soccer teams that we're sponsoring. We're doing a big foundation that will give back to the community. And I think particularly for sports, which is a big uniter of people. I mean, in a country that's terribly divided today, sports brings us together. And I think giving back to the community is a really important part of it.
I want to ask you about your investment in esports, because in addition to FC Cincinnati, you also invested in esports. That's growing too. Wow. I mean, I look at that projectile over the last 5 years and where it's going. What attracted you to esports?
Yeah. Well, the same thing. Remember my story about investing behind trends?
Yes.
This trend is unbelievable. I mean, just a couple of statistics: 2.5 billion gamers worldwide, 500 million esports viewers, 140 million future gamers are born annually. So lots of runway. And 60% of gamers are 18 to 34, which is, the most important audience for sponsors and advertisers. Highly educated, relatively high income level. And the engagement, Brian, is off the charts. 2 to 3 hours of playing time a day and 5 hours of watching a day. So you've got highly engaged, fast growing spot. And believe it or not, the baby boomers have sort of come on. Everyone thought this was totally a young person sport,
right?
But 60% increase in baby boomers playing games since 2018. So, my buddies and I are now playing games.
So that's what I was going to ask you. Are you playing? And if so, what are you playing?
I'm a beginner.
Okay.
I'm just a beginner. I play Fortnite.
You're ahead of me. I had the late David Stern on with me a few years ago. And what he said to me, and I would probably agree with this, is he said, esports is not my thing, but I recognize it is a thing. So I recognize it's a thing, but to be honest with you, I'm just not, I don't understand it well enough, and I don't have enough.
Well, you can start, you can have a warm-up act. I mean, you could play Candy Crush. That you could do.
Okay. So that's where I should start, Candy Crush.
You could start Candy Crush, and which is really the beginners.
Okay.
And then you can, move on to real games, of which Fortnite is a real game, but it's easy to understand and easy to get started.
It's amazing. I see these venues being built all over the world for esports. And, so we just talked about FC Cincinnati's venue. Esports venues are being built around the globe too. And these are large venues. So again, it shows you the trend and where it's going. This investment wouldn't be made unless people thought this was going to be even bigger than it is already.
You're right. Absolutely right. And, people love to come and watch esports, which was interesting to me when we first got into this 4 or 5 years ago. I said, no, wait a second. People are going to want to, they're casual gamers. They're going to want to come to a location and watch the best in the world play esports. It was a little counterintuitive to me. But then I thought, I don't know, if you're a golfer, you like to watch golf. If you're a tennis player, you like to watch tennis. If you're a soccer player, you like to watch soccer. So, when I thought about it that way, I said, okay, well then, that makes more sense to me.
Other than trends and the wind blowing behind you, what are some of the elements that you look for when someone comes to you and says, hey, make an investment in my company?
Yeah, well, obviously the financial architecture, what's the economic model? And, so where do the revenues come from? And what are they likely to do? Some parts of the revenue streams may be growing, some may be shrinking. How much in professional sports, how much of those revenue streams do you own? One of the reasons we're excited to own the stadium and own the parking around the stadium and own some of the real estate around the stadium is those are important revenue streams as well. And then you have to look at what are the costs, because in the end, It may take a while, but in the end, revenues have to be greater than costs.
Right.
I'm sort of an old-fashioned business person, and so we want to run these teams. We may lose some money in the early days, but we'd like to run them, at making some money, and then obviously, the capital gains is probably where the real payoff is. But you have to look at the financial architecture. Then the next thing is who is running the club, and who do you have? Because I believe in any business, a really important character of great leaders is they hire great leaders. So I always say the right people in the right job at the right time with the right attitude gets you 80% of the way home. And one of the things we like very much, in addition to the ownership group, is Jeff Birding is a founder and the president of FC Cincinnati. And I think he's very talented and has put a talented group around him.
That's great. So I want to talk a little bit of business with you. You've led some incredible companies. I mentioned them at the top of this interview. What makes for a good leader? You're talking about, the leader of FC Cincinnati. Obviously, you're a tremendous leader. We have a lot of leaders who listen to this show. What makes for a good leader?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, having some experience. Experience actually does matter. I often say, and this was particularly true at HP and at eBay, because I went to eBay when I was 42. So I had some experience. I said, I have seen this movie before, and I know how it's going to end unless we do something differently. So I do think domain experience is important. The second is the ability to identify, nurture, and grow great talent. As I was just saying, you need to be a talent attractor of people who are smarter, better, and have a ton of runway. And you can't be threatened by people who are smarter than you or know more about something than you do. The second thing I would say, I think importantly, is having the right strategy. I often say the right strategy and less than perfect execution is far better than the wrong strategy, but with perfect execution. And our world is so dynamic today, Brian, that you got to be moving your strategy and thinking through what you need to be doing differently at a much more rapid rate than in the history of business, honestly. I was reading a statistic the other day that it took, I think, 60 years for HP to reach $1 billion in sales. It took Microsoft 10 years, and it took Google 5 years. Right. So these companies you're getting to scale much faster, and that means you've got to be really thinking about your strategy. So I think that's super important. And then the second is you've got to keep an eye on the financial architecture. You have to understand, how do I make money in this business? And the old 80-20 rule, 20% of your activity will get you 80% of the way home. Probably 20% of your customers account for 80% of your revenue. The 80-20 rule is alive and well in every single business, and the intuitive understanding of what that is, I think, is important. And then last is you have to take some risks, right? Not everything is knowable, and you have to take smart risks. But doing nothing is a strategy, and it's usually a bad strategy. You have to keep moving. It's how sharks, they die if they don't keep moving. And so you got to keep moving. And if you make a mistake, you fix it really fast. But you have to take smart bets and smart risks.
You are also someone who's on the forefront of media trends. I'm so fascinated to see where the media is going, especially in the last year. Again, during the pandemic, we've seen growth of streaming platforms. Netflix, Apple, HBO Max, all these platforms are growing. Cable is declining a little bit. What are your thoughts on, 5 years from now, how are we going to be consuming media?
Yeah, well, media is undergoing some of the biggest disruption I think most people in that industry have seen in decades. I mean, this is a huge, gigantic, seismic shift. And I would argue it is as seismic as the invention of the movie camera and the advent of movies. I think it is as seismic as the invention of TV. Remember, think about TV. Everyone thought TV was not, you had to go buy a piece of furniture for your room. Okay. and so think about the change in consumer habits that was required there. I think this is the next enormous change in media, which is streaming. And what consumers are, I think now, the way they want to watch what they want to watch, where they want to watch it, on the device they want to watch it. And so it's up to all the content providers to make sure that we are making that level of flexibility available in an easy and intuitive way. And I think, frankly, this will get a lot more intuitive over time. I don't know about you. I think for our generation, when you go to a new place with a new TV, it takes you a while to figure out how to navigate. They ask you for your credentials. They ask you for all these different things that you're not necessarily being used to being asked for. And so I do think that this has to get much more intuitive and frankly, much more standardized. But I think for sports in particular, that ability to provide your audience that flexibility with very high quality production values and with storytelling wrapped around. People love the stories of the players and they love the backstory of the team and the backstory of controversy. And so I think there's going to be more emphasis on the storytelling in addition to the excitement of the game per se. And listen, there's a lot of new players, right? It used to be just the, big three networks. Now you've got big conglomerates that have, multiple different ways of delivering content to players. And I do think the competition for these sports rights is going to continue to increase. Because remember what I said, sports are still the big uniter. And I think, so I think the competition is going to be significant for these rights. Look at the NFL deal.
Right. So, Amazon jumped in with some NFL games, Thursday night games.
Thursday night. Mm-hmm.
And I would think at some point, Apple, Netflix, some of these big streaming services, like you said, it's live content. It's a great uniter. This isn't live sports, but one of my favorite shows of the last year is Ted Lasso on Apple Plus.
Yeah.
So just that alone, people have really rallied around that show. But I agree with you. I think it's only a matter of time until these streaming platforms are showing live sports on their platforms.
Yeah. Well, I think then the question is, do they have to, it's a little bit back in the day when people said, would bricks and mortar also be really good at e-commerce? Because you had two ways to deliver product. Okay, so, Walmart now is, I think, doing very well because you can buy a product in the store, you can pick up in the store, you can order online, you can have it order online and then pick up in the store. So they're really trying to, no matter which way you want to buy, you can buy. And so the question is, will, the media companies that have a streaming service and a network and a, cable channel and others, will they be better positioned or will the pure plays be better positioned? I think we don't know the answer to that yet.
A few years ago, I was at the Bloomberg Players Tech Summit in San Francisco, and I saw you on stage there. And I thought you were great. And you were talking about Quibi. And I really liked Quibi. I really did. And I thought you were on to something there. I'm an entrepreneur too, not at the same level as you. I've had Mark Cuban on, lots of entrepreneurs. Sometimes we try things and they simply don't work. Yeah. I thought that was going to work. And I thought the timing was good. And I loved what you had to say that day on stage. What were some of the lessons learned from that? Because again, from where I sit, I thought that was a brilliant idea.
Well, thank you. We did too, obviously. I think a couple of things. One is, I would not necessarily recommend that you launch a mobile on-the-go app that was designed for Hollywood content on your mobile phones in the middle of a pandemic. Right. Because our use case was mobile on the go while you were waiting in line for a cup of coffee at Starbucks, while you were commuting, while you were, waiting for, people to arrive for a meeting, things like that. Our whole use case was compromised. Now, what we don't know is how much was the use case and how much was just the wrong product market fit. I suspect it was a little bit of both. But this is where data and analytics and experience, remember I said I'd seen the movie before, right. I think paid off. Because we saw that we were compromised and that this was not working the way we had initially hoped. And we looked at the data and we said to ourselves, we could run this out and spend the rest of the money, or we could say, this is not the right time. There may be another time for this, but this is not the right time in the middle of the pandemic. And let's return cash to shareholders. And that's ultimately the decision that Jeffrey Katzenberg and I made. And that we, were very careful to communicate to our production partners, to our investors. We took care of our employees and, now are in the process of returning funds to shareholders. So super disappointing, crushing in many ways because we were so excited about it. But, I just think we drew a bad hand with timing and it might not have worked anyway, but I don't know that we'll ever really know. And if you told me that the pandemic would be over in 2 to 3 months, like maybe in January, maybe we would have kept going. But look at here we are still today, not all the way through this. And so I think it was a very difficult decision, but actually, as I look back on it, I think the right one.
I'll just say again, I think it was a brilliant idea. I think you were a little too early. And who knew a pandemic was coming, right? Like no one could have predicted that. But
Sort of a black swan event.
Right. Before I let you go, you and your husband, Dr. Griff Harsh, are so charitable and have given millions of dollars to charity via your foundation. I'll ask you the same question that I asked you about investment. When you're giving to charity, what are some of the elements under consideration for you and your husband? I'm sure a lot of it's passion, but what else comes into play there?
Yeah. Well, I think particularly with charitable giving, focus is really important because you've got to be so knowledgeable today about a certain area or areas. And so we've picked two areas for our Charitable Foundation. One is education, and the other is the environment. And education, we're particularly focused on K through 12 education because we asked ourselves if we could make a difference to one thing over the next couple of decades, what would it be? There's so many challenges: racial injustice, economic inequality, so many different things. And we said, gosh, if we could solve getting every child access to a great education, a lot of those other problems might go away. And then we care a lot about climate change and the environment. And my husband is on the board of EDF. I used to be on the board of the Nature Conservancy. So those are the two areas that we really focus on. And I'm chairman of Teach for America nationally. So that's how I exhibit my passion for K through 12 beyond just the financial support.
I saw that, and I had former Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan on a few weeks ago, and we talked about education. And I have a daughter who's 16, is in high school, and I've seen, the last year, a lot of education has gone virtual. It's just now starting to go back where it's either hybrid or you're returning to school. You talked earlier about the media and it being a pivotal time for media going forward. I believe it's the same way for education going forward. Are we going to reimagine education going forward, or are we going to do it the way that we've done it for a long time? How do you see education being reimagined going forward?
I think we have a once in a generation opportunity, Brian, because what this pandemic has taught us, and I'm sure has taught your daughter, is that there's a lot of ways to get information. And we cannot just arrange our classrooms the way we have arranged them for the last 100 years. Our education system was designed to produce factory workers. And it did a brilliant job of that for many, many years. But think about the skills that children need today as they go into, multiple careers over a generation, a lot more critical thinking. It's going to be a different thing that we have to imagine. And we also saw that the pandemic exposed even greater inequalities in education. And today, your zip code is the most determinant variable in the quality of your education, where you live. And that's not fair and it's not right. And so we have to figure out how to reimagine education from certainly, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but also, are we creating an environment where kids have the confidence, where they're getting the support they need socially, where it's the whole child that we're thinking about. And that's a new way of thinking about it, because it was really, for many years, everyone comes in and they're ready to learn and they got their workbook and they're ready to go. That's not the way it is anymore.
Last question for you. What lies ahead? You have so many interesting things that you're doing, but is there anything out there that you're keeping your eye on? We talked about esports. We just talked about your role with Teach America. Is there anything you're keeping your eye on saying, I really want to be a part of that going forward?
Yeah. Well, I continue to be very interested in technology. I think technology in many ways was the defining industry of my generation. I think it will be the defining industry of the next generation. And every business now is a technology business. I think of FC Cincinnati as a technology and data analytics business. We're going to be better because of the technology and the data analytics that we're going to apply to this business. And so if you think about technology and all the different areas that it can go, I think that, those are areas I want to keep an eye on, whether it's machine learning or AI. Sports betting is a pretty interesting, talk about investing behind trends. Some people have challenges around betting in terms of, is that a good thing for society? But I think it's, there's an inevitable march towards sports betting. Sports betting would be my guess. So I'm, focused on, that, and then I'm focused on industries that, disrupt the status quo in a good way. I like to call it constructive, disruption.
Meg, continued success to you, and thanks so much for joining me on Sports Business Radio.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. Good to be with you.